Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the experiences of individuals from the different Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities. And this week we're going to have a kind of like special edition because we've got two guests with us. We've got Professor Stephen Curry and Miss Anique Varleigh, who are going to be with us. And they are, it's entitled Let's Talk About Race, Race Equality at Imperial College, London. And they were the co-chairs of the recent Race Equalities Charter bid, which Imperial College gave. I'm going to let them introduce themselves a bit and tell us a little bit about what the Race Equalities Charter is and how the work which we've done, or the work which they did in order to get this initiative off the ground. So first of all, I'd just like to welcome Stephen and Anique. It's always good to have you on. And just give us a little bit of a background about the Race Equalities Charter, a little bit about yourselves, and then we can go on to talk about the Race Equalities Charter.
Sure. Anique, would you like to go first?
Yep. Hi, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Anique Varleigh. I'm Head of Exams and Assessment at the Business School. And I was just saying to Wayne before the session started, I seem to have my fingers in lots of pies. So my personal interest is very much about equality. So for me, back in 2017, I think 2018, when the college first was having discussions about the Race Equality Charter Award, it was something that I was massively interested in on a personal note, and was also pleasantly surprised and reassured that this was something that was on the agenda for Imperial. So it kind of ticked my own personal interests, and I wanted to very much be an advocate of change and help to shape things. And as we progressed through through the whole sort of process of getting to an application, which just isn't about sort of writing a final report. It was very much an iterative process and was about dialogue. We had the opportunity to listen to lots of voices from students and staff, which I don't feel had happened quite on that scale before then. So that's kind of where I was coming from a professional staff point of view, and how I became a part of the committee and the group. Stephen.
Thanks, Anique. So good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Stephen Curry. So I am the Assistant Provost for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the college. And actually, in preparation for this, I was looking back just to sort of see, you know, where did this sort of discussion around the Race Equality Charter and whether or not Imperial should engage in it, where did that really start? And I found a document which was basically my notes preparing for my interview for this position, which was held in the sort of early summer of 2017. And in preparation for that, I had actually talked to a number of people. I talked to the sort of previous holder of this role, who was Dr. Griffiths, who was Provost Envoy for Gender Equality. And the title of her position and her main preoccupations, I think, reflected the college's long engagement with the Athena Swan Charter, which has, I think, been a very important instrument for advancing the conversation around gender equality. But I think at Imperial and across the sector generally, I think it had been recognized that actually the success of Athena Swan, while it's addressing a really important problem and one that we definitely have not solved yet, and I know there are lots of people that are rightly critical of the bureaucratic nature of Athena Swan, there was a sense that it was attracting attention away from the broader issues in EDI. And one of those that was losing out was the issue of race equality, which is obviously very important. So I did highlight it actually in my interview as one of the things that I thought the college should be taking on board. And when I got the job and then attended actually an early meeting of the EDI strategy group, which was back then October 2017, chaired by James Sterling, who's very fondly remembered here. The proposal I put at that meeting was that, you know, the college should sign up. I explained to them what they needed to do. I just looked at my notes. I said, I estimate it should take about 18 months to get an application ready. That proved to be a completely inadequate estimate, but that's a flaw of mine, always thinking you can get more done in the time available. We recognized that there was a risk associated with doing that because we knew that many institutions that had applied for the award didn't get it, but we were absolutely prepared to take that risk on board. And if we didn't get it, we would, take the feedback, learn the lessons, pick ourselves up, and go back in again. But there was a clear commitment right from the beginning, and that has carried through over the intervening years. So as Anique said, that commitment started at the beginning of 2018, which is now 3.5 years ago. We became a member of the charter and then started the work proper. So early that year in the spring, we hired a race equality charter coordinator. So that was Sally Perec. And then Sally and I worked over the summer to sort of help identify who would be good people to have on the self-assessment team, people like Anique and Wayne, for example. And the group itself first met then in November of 2018, and so has been working regularly since then and more intensely over the last year or two. We were delayed somewhat by COVID, but I think the whole process got a big shot in the arm from the Black Lives Matter movement in June of last year. I think the group was very well aware of the importance of the work, but I think it really did bring home to us just how much it was going to matter to our community, that we were able to sort of take this really seriously, dig in and do it. So we there's a lot of work involved, but we can maybe talk a little bit more about that later.
Because I was gonna ask that just a quick question, because you've outlined quite nicely about the college's commitment, where it began, kind of like 3.5 years ago from the inception to where we currently are, having just recently received the approval for the Bronze Award. But there's a lot of work that's gone into that. So I wouldn't mind if we just break down some of the areas which the Race Equalities Charter actually covers, and then we can look at what that actually means in terms of the action plans going forward. So if I just start off with that question, can we get for the listeners, can we get a little bit more of a broader sense of, when we're talking about the Race Equalities Charter, what areas are we looking at within that charter? What is it that we would have to demonstrate as part of the self-assessment team?
Okay, so it basically asks you to look at everything. Mm-hmm. So it's a very intensive process. So the data, and you're expected to provide quantitative data, but also qualitative data. So actually, we did actually launch our work on the charter when we invited Chi Onwurah, the MP, who's an alumna of this university. She did engineering here back in the day. And was, not only the only woman in the room very often during her time here, but was the only Black woman in the room. And that was sort of towards the end of 2018, and that also used that occasion to launch the survey. So we did a survey of staff and of students to gather views. And that was very informative. And then the issues that were flagged in the survey, we followed up then with a number of focus groups to dig into, people's experiences of minoritization, of day-to-day life, either working or studying at Imperial. And then the actual demographic data that you have to provide is very wide-ranging. So we look at our staff numbers, we look at our student numbers as well, but we also look at many other aspects of staff and student experience. So for staff, we will look at things like recruitment, promotion, access to opportunities for training and career progression. Mm-hmm. And for students, we look at our admissions process, who applies, who gets interviewed, who gets an offer. We look at our current population of students. We look at who gets first class and upper second class degrees in terms of ethnicity. And then also the outcomes. So what sorts of jobs and other career options do people go into? And we try to analyze that in as granular a way as we can with respect to ethnicity. So the college does collect data and there are about 17 different sort of fine-grained ethnic groups. So, you know, Black British of African descent, Black British Caribbean, for example, Asian Bangladeshi, Asian Pakistani, Asian Indian, Asian Chinese. And we treated Chinese as a separate category because we have a large population, both in staff and student terms, of people from China, both British Chinese and Chinese Chinese. But the analysis is done as granular level as possible. But when you break it down really small, then you sometimes get very small numbers. And so in the interest of protecting confidentiality, then we have to sometimes look at a higher level of aggregation. So a lot of the data is presented as looking at you know, Black staff and students, or Asian staff and students, or mixed race, for example.
So just Anique, what was your role within this process? I'm going to just pull this because both of you were co-chairs. What does that entail, and how did the two of you work together?
So I'm trying to think if it was 2019, beginning of 2019, where I was invited to be a co-chair. And one of the beauties of that is that I think as we were having discussions, that was a genuine mix across Imperial departments of staff. So to give you sort of an idea or a flavour of how broad it is, it involved professional staff at all levels and grades, academic staff. We had really good student representation. So Shervin, as part of the student union, was involved from the beginning. And so in terms of representation, it was a very different experience because there were more people from a whole plethora of ethnic backgrounds in the room. So that was something that I wasn't used to here at Imperial and other previous roles. And so it quickly became kind of obvious that having Stephen as a chair is brilliant, but it also meant that from an academic point of view, but if we were really sort of being honest about it being a community sort of representation of everybody in Imperial, then it was good to have someone from professional staff also involved. So I suppose that was my the first thing that became useful and important and actually helpful. As it happened, I didn't feel there was any sort of barriers anyway, so I don't think people were really aware of, you know, or there was, if someone was an academic against somebody that was a student representation in the room. And so the other thing that it did was to give me and sort of professional staff the opportunity to have a representation on an equal footing, I think, in shaping where the application was going to be going through, to offer ideas of how to look at things outside of the data, because the application process requires so much data that I think professional staff were able to give a different slant to that. But in real terms, it was very collaborative, and there wasn't really much, I don't think, in terms of lacking in order to have a co-chair, but I think it was useful in terms of the dialogue and also take a bit of the pressure off in chairing those sessions from Stephen.
That's good. As well,
I mean, there is another point. I'm sure Anique remembers this, but so the group had an away day in the summer of 2019, which was led by the very excellent Melanie Lee. And I think, you know, we had very frank discussions, I think, about the operation of the group. And although I do like to think of myself as a friendly, approachable kind of person, you know, universities are incredibly hierarchical places. And there were some people expressed the view that, you know, they didn't always feel quite able to, you know, speak their mind in the room. And, you know, and you know, I guess I was a little bit blind to the impact, I think, sometimes of those types of hierarchies. And I think one of the outcomes of that was that, you know, one way to break down that barrier is for people like me to let go of a little bit of power. And that was why we then decided to run it with a co-chair. So initially I was just the chair on my own. But after the open day, or not the open day, the away day that we'd had, we decided, you know, democratically and in terms of, you know, empowering people to speak, then it would be much better to have a co-chair. And I have to say, when I was thinking, okay, who would be a good candidate, Anique's name popped into my head almost immediately, because of
Didn't pay him to say
not just her professionalism, but she had not been shy at all about contributing to meetings, and had been a real, force for good, all in the run up to that. And so I was delighted when she accepted to take on the role.
As someone who sat in the meetings, I can confer that the two of you were excellent at keeping us on track. Sometimes there was times when we were going off, but you pulled us back in, which was really good, and helped us to remain focused on our task, which was quite a big task. I'm not quite sure that the people understand the scale of the work, which was, and the number of individuals who were actually, how many was on the actual race equalities self-assessment team in total. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of about 25.
Yeah, I think it's about that ballpark. We do have a link. So I've posted a link in the chat to the page on the Race Equality Charter at the college, and there is a link there to the members of the self-assessment team.
Yeah.
So you can look at the membership list. And we even include then previous members, actually. And I wanted to say, actually, Anique pointed out the real importance of having PTO staff represented on the committee. And actually, one of the people on there who was really fantastic was Darren Elaine, who worked in ICT. Sadly, no longer works at the college. He's moved on, but he was really brilliant at thinking, okay, we need data analysis. And he helped to sort of get us plugged into the Power BI dashboards, and did a tremendous amount of work, actually helping to equip us with the tools that we needed.
Yeah, that the logistical side of the amount of data that we were having to generate, or we were collating, and then finding, I remember sitting in one of the assessments and thinking, where do we start? And I think at the away day, that was one of the themes which kept coming up. Where do we start? There is just so much data here. How do we piece any of this together? How do we connect anything? It was just a massive task. And the away day with Melanie was brilliant at helping to focus our attention. I don't know what the two of you would say with regards to that as well.
It was, I mean, I think this is Imperial, so a lot of what we do is data driven. So I think you would, we all came from a point of view of sort of accepting, but there are so many ways or so many systems that we need to extract the data from. And actually one of the biggest challenges was coming up with an application that wasn't sort of just data driven, and trying to piece together people's voices. And I feel that we did that really well, because we did have other focus groups. So it became a kind of, this is your evidence base, and this is the part that is very human. And that became the kind of the balance that I'm sure that anybody that's doing an application would have to get. But your starting point needed to be kind of quite bleak in some ways, because you have to be very honest, So yes, we've achieved our bronze status at the moment now, but in order to do that effectively, we had to be very honest and kind of bare all, if you like. And by looking at the data, some of the trends that we were finding and we were seeing made it all the sort of starker. And then we needed to make sure that we have that narrative to go to make sense of the data that you're looking at, because it is so mammoth. I don't know if you'd agree, Stephen, but I think that's sort of in the biggest sort of chunk of the journey that we went on, that felt like a sort of a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, it was just mind-bogglingly enormous, the complexity of the task of gathering the data, even despite the fact that we had long years of experience of gathering information for Athena Swan Awards, which are structured in many of the same ways. But I do remember, we had lots of conversations even before we even got numbers, just with various people involved, either in HR or strategic planning about it. And sometimes you don't even know what data you want until you actually have some to look at, and you can look at it and you think, well, okay, this tells me this much, but actually I want to know, I want to know this as well. And so Imperial, as Anique says, we are data driven, and as a high powered university, I think one always wants to be, demonstrating to our community that we are proceeding on a very evidence-based way. I think that's the only way you can actually take people with you at a place like Imperial, or basically at any university. And Imperial's not bad at data, but we had to work with HR, we had to work with strategic planning, we had to work with registry. So the various different sources, they are really quite fragmented, and sometimes in the formats were not the way that we needed them to be, and so we did rely very much on colleagues in all of those divisions to help produce reports for us. And actually Rob Bell was a very key part of it as well. He lots of experience of working with Athena Swan, knows his way around the college's data systems as well. And when Sally left the end of last year to start her PhD, Rob stepped in as the acting rec coordinator, and it was a really tremendous help in helping to pull that together. So it did just slowly start to crystallize, and I was always very keen to try and tell a story using the data as much as possible. I had read rec applications from other universities, because I'm a great believer in not having to reinvent the wheel. If somebody else has done it well, let's just copy what they did. But a lot of them just presented pages and pages of tables, and it's the sort of documents you read them and you want your life to end, because and you lose the story because of just the level of detail that goes on. So our application is much more graphical. There are tables of data in there. We won't be able to share them all in the public version because of GDPR, but we're going to try and be as transparent as possible about that, and we're working to prepare a public version of the full application. But the full application runs to over 200 pages. Okay, now it's mostly pictures, okay, because it's charts and data and whatnot. So, and I'm sure it will be of hopefully a great interest to a lot of people. We have got a short summary version that's got the sort of data, the key and most telling pieces of data that emerge from our analysis, and again, we just want to make sure that people are aware of what we've learned about the institution, and what we've learned are are new things. Some of them are good in a way. So broadly speaking, the diversity of staff and students at Imperial is increasing over the year. It has done over the past several years, but we did identify a very severe problem with the lack of representation of Black academics at Imperial College. We know that we already knew from the work on our access and participation plan that we hadn't been recruiting enough Black undergraduates, for example, and that our admissions processes were actually biased against talented Black students. And we've already started to take measures to address that, and we were able to put in the application data showing that actually the gap in admissions was definitely closing, and has been closing over the last few years because of actions that we'd already taken. But I'm hoping that we've learned the lessons, but one of the things that will be part of the actions that we take going forward will be actually to make sure we create the data infrastructure that not just makes it easy to reapply the next time in 5 years' time, but actually gives the people who are responsible for the actions the data that they need to check whether or not the interventions and initiatives that they are launching are having the benefits that we hope they will have.
2 follow-up questions based on what you've said. You kind of like was answering some of the questions which were flying in my head as you were going along. One of them was, what was the most stark finding that I know there was a lot, but what would you say was the most stark, sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that, but what was the most stark or finding which you thought, this needs to change, something needs to be done? Which one of them, if you could name just one, would you say popped into your head?
Well, I have to be careful how I phrase the numbers here, but the most stark one for me certainly was the finding that there are fewer than 5 Black academics working at Imperial College. Okay, when you think we have an academic staff body of about 1,500 people, then that comes nowhere near to representation in terms of the UK population, never mind the population of London. And so that was the one that was most telling. And that doesn't include people like your good self, Wayne, who are teaching fellows and who I would think of as an academic colleague for sure. But the way that the REC divides up staff groups, then this would be lecturers, senior lecturers, readers, and professors. And so one of our actions is about targeted recruitment of professorial staff, we hope, from among the Black academics working in, well, not just in the UK. We're very, as Imperial, half our academic staff come from overseas. So, but that's clearly something that we need to address.
Brilliant. Anique?
I don't know if Anique had
mine was the same. I think also I was a little bit naive, I think, which is why that was really stark for me. But for all of the same reasons that Stephen has already articulated. But the other one that was less based on the data and actually from the working groups was about how students were feeling in terms of lack of representation and in learning materials and teaching materials, as well as events, guest speakers, sort of all of the things that you get more out of whenever you're doing any program of study, just aside from the actual learning that you signed up for, and how complex that was. And that was really stark for me, because they are a representation of a younger population, from that point of view, and it felt that we were a complete sort of mismatch, and I was again perhaps a little bit naive about how far reaching that was and how impactful that was to students learning, because there definitely were examples of poor practice, if you like, in materials or language, guest speakers, etc. And so that was not quite the question that you asked, but that was another sort of stark area that was really about voices rather than the data for me. Yeah,
that's brilliant. My kind of like second follow-up question was, because Stephen mentioned about the fact that putting in systems in place so that we could, one, collate and more easily access the data going forward. Following on from that, my question is, so what is the action plans based on the fact that we've got the documents which actually highlight where the baseline is currently? What are some of the action plans going forward, and how are we going to do that, use that information within the community of Imperial College?
Okay, so the action plan was developed over quite a long period, I guess, starting from the end of last year right through till about June or mid-July, in fact, just before the deadline, and it involves lots of work by lots of different people around the college. And one of the things we were very keen to make sure to do, and certainly I was mindful of this, was that the action plan should involve the relevant people working in the relevant operations. So it's the vice provost for education, or the head of HR, or the provost, or the chair of council, or the head of recruitment. So the action plan is so the link has been posted in the chat. So the full action plan is available to people. When we talked about the REC action plan within Provost Board, then Ian was very keen. He's a very hard-headed, get things done kind of person, and so he was very clear that he really wanted a very heavily prioritized action plan. And if you look at the plans from many other universities, or some other universities, they run to about 60-70 pages and have many moving parts, shall we say. And ours is considerably shorter than that. It's about 20 pages long, and it's clearly divided into a sort of priority actions and then additional actions, which are also things that we will want to do. But among the priority actions, so there are things like, so we've identified, and the action plan is supposed to be data driven. So the whole philosophy of the REC is that you analyze your data, you look at the survey data and focus groups, what are the most problematic issues for you, and what are you going to do about them? So I guess the main ones would be then there's targeted funding for recruitment of professors from underrepresented groups with a particular target for Black professors, but actually that also includes women professors because we still have challenges. There. There's a lot of work that's focused around the whole way that we go about recruiting people, and I think we have experimented, and some departments have certainly shown that a proactive and more inclusive process that's more values based does actually pay dividends and does actually reap you a richer set of candidates to apply, and who would then get shortlisted and who then get appointed. And we are aiming to be much more systematic about that. There are many actions around career progression, so mentoring schemes, not just for staff, but also for postdoctoral students. Then there's a recognition that there's issues there. And the announcement earlier this year of £5 million of funding over the next 5 years, specifically targeted at Black students. Again, that is emerged in part from the lessons that we had learned from the Race Equality Charter. And also on a student focused side, then there will be more work to help departments think through, well, how do we make our curricula more inclusive? This was long envisaged in the teaching and learning strategy that the previous Vice Provost for Education had conceived of, but the phase of work of thinking about the curriculum content and situating discussions about STEM subjects in and understanding the sort of social and historical context in which they've emerged, which will address issues of structural racism and historical racism and exclusion. We're now launching on that component of it as well, thanks to the REC.
Okay, I'm just wary of time, even though I think I should have scheduled at least an hour and a half for this, because I'm pretty sure I've got loads, and I was on the REC set, but I still love to hear what's going on. I need to open it up to see if there's anyone in the audience who also has questions. I did see that there was a comment about the fact that they're understanding about the whole census, the 2011 census, and about the lack of representation. That was an issue which came up. Also the fact the HR team and the work which they've done also in terms of helping to push the data through and give the data that we're able to use should also be recognized. So Clement.
Absolutely. So Susan Littleson, who made that comment, is absolutely right to remind me that Clement Arence's team and Kia Winook and also Louise Hanger from Strategic Planning, these people were absolutely fabulous in terms of the effort that they put in to contribute to this work. I don't know if Susan wants to say something herself.
It was definitely a coming together of lots of different people in different areas to make this happen. And genuinely, Susan's comment is really accurate, because we tapped into everybody's possible connections and networking and things which made it more achievable. But the action plan is also about accountability. Right. And making us responsible for those measurables that we're saying we're judging ourselves by. So never mind what the REC is asking of us. This is what we are asking of ourselves. And so it really wouldn't have been possible without lots of people giving us information in whatever format we ended up getting it in initially, and then trying to make it something that we could use.
So just kind of like a follow-up question while I'm waiting to see if anyone wants to ask a question. Everyone's gone shy this week. But one of the questions which I would like to find out, how long, we've just recently got the award. When's the next deadline? So when's our next milestone when we have to kind of like submit another application? And how can we prevent this from becoming just a tick box exercise, etc.? So it's an intentionality. What's the intentionality that we're looking for here?
Okay, so the action plan is configured over a 3-year period, because that traditionally was the period over which awards would last. But actually AdvancedHE, who run the Race Equality Charter, and Athena Swan, they've just announced that the Race Equality Charter will now align with the way that Athena Swan is done. And so the awards actually last for 5 years. And this has been introduced because a lot of the criticism around these awards is that they are, bureaucratic, they are regarded as tick box exercises. And the aim is to try and make it more impactful, better, more bang for your buck, shall we say. And so you've got a 5-year period in which to run your action plan. So one of the things they expect us to do is to have another look at our action plan and then sort of map it out over 5 years. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to let's just take it easy and we'll spread a 3-year work package into 5 years, but it will mean that we can be more thorough, and maybe there are other things that we can bring on board. So we have an award for 5 years, but so responsibility for monitoring the action plan, that has been assumed by the EDI strategy group, and that is chaired by the provost. And as I said, Ian's very much let's commit to things that we can deliver, and then let's show that we're delivering them. So one of the things we've been working on, and I'm very thankful to Gabriella Kerr-Gordon and Angus Brown from Anique and HR, who've been developing a sort of action tracker tool. And so this is going to help us basically monitor the progress against all of the actions, and it's been divided up. Each action is obviously a sort of complex series of events, and we just last week we presented that to the EDI strategy group. It's a little bit of a work in progress. There's a couple of technical things to figure out, but and the EDISG meets 3 times a year, and every time that it meets, then we will be reviewing, okay, what were the things that we expected to have completed by now or within the next 6 months? Where are we on these? And then if there's a block or if there's a delay, what do we need to unblock that? Do we need more resources? Do we need a bit more effort here or there? And so that it'll be the EDI strategy group that has responsibility for that. The SAT will continue to meet and to sort of monitor progress, and then to provide input and critique and suggestions about how things are going. And so we will have that representative group as well that will be keeping an eye on things.
Thank you. That's great. I was just thinking with regards to what you've just said, is how will you get not everyone's going to be kind of like as foresighted and willing to engage with some of the recommendations. How are we going to get those people on board? What's our plan of action of what charm offensive have you got up your sleeves, Anique and Stephen, to get everybody?
Roll you out, Wayne. I was going to get you to champion it for us.
Other than that strategy.
Well, I think hopefully it's not a charm offensive, because that sounds like a fairly smarmy sort of superficial thing. But I think there is a conversation to be had. There will be members of our community who don't really get this, who think we live in a post-racial society. We've got an Equalities Act for the last 10 or 11 years, and there's no structural racism in Britain, etc., etc. You do come across that view, or this is special treatment for minorities is not fair. Anique had an instance this week where was accused of racism herself, I believe, where the business school was for an approach that was targeting people. And one has to engage with that view, and I think we have to be able to make the argument. I'm quite happy to engage in that process and to talk to people. I have already, to some degree, in the wake of the history group's report, which has stirred up a lot of conversation about what we are doing and why we're doing it, and whether it's really been well thought out. But I absolutely think that it's got to be part of the conversation. And one of the values of actually doing the rec is that it puts this conversation on the table. So this we've said this is race equality is something that we have not achieved at Imperial College, but we want to, and here's how we are planning to go about it.
Okay, so just following on from that, or Anique, did you have anything
Yeah.
else to add to that? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the taking everybody with you for anything is always problematic. And I think it has to, it shouldn't deter us from the re-education. So for every instance that you come across, I don't feel that it's not beholden on, me as a Black woman to be responsible and champion the view of a whole, community. It doesn't make sense to me, but I know that that's a burden that some of us all feel. But that doesn't detract us from our intention here, and this is the community that we are striving to create. Mm-hmm. And if we are serious about equality and parity, we need to be very honest about our starting position and where we want to be. Mm-hmm. And that's part of actually how we implement things, where there are some choices and there are some things that are just going to be, because those are changes that have to be made. Mm-hmm. And how we evidence that. So, by having targeted recruitment, addressing the fact that we have very poor figures when it comes to Black academic staff, to a point where over the years you hope that understanding and that re-education of where there isn't that parity at the moment and there isn't that equality is what we're striving towards. To give to one isn't to remove from another, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that takes time for that to be learned, for those that are not open to learn at the start.
Yeah. So we need to demonstrate, based on what you've both said, we have to demonstrate positive action, and educate, bring people on board as to why it's important that we have to embark upon this particular activity at this particular moment in time. We can't just leave it for somebody else to do. Much like climate change and stuff like that, we have to act now. Yeah.
It's a commitment. Yeah, it's
the commitment.
A commitment. Yeah, and that's what we are here. If us as Imperial employees, staff, it's very easy to, inaction is often easy to do. And taking action and putting yourself as an example and do activities like the Belonging series, there are small things that seem very small that make a difference in the longer term. And that's the commitment that we've signed up to. At least that's my commitment as being part of the RECSAT, and what my takeaway is, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a question from Crystal, and then there's another one. So Crystal, if you'd like to ask your question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne, and thank you, Anique and Stephen. This has been really interesting. I'm just wondering if any of the actions outlined in the REC are research focused. So are there any efforts being made to understand where these discrepancies arise from? Because, I'm thinking about when we had kind of the pay gap report, the ethnicity pay gap report, and kind of the efficacy of blind actioning seems to be kind of inherently lessened in contrast to informed actioning. And I'm just wondering if any of the actions are actually focused on figuring out why.
So some of them are. I mean, clearly in this space there's already a lot of existing research on the origins of bias in different processes. But certainly in terms of recruitment, one of the things that we identified in the data is that there appears to be a bias in the shortlisting process. So if you look at I think it's in the summary file, but we're just comparing white versus Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups there. But in terms of the numbers of people who apply to us, then if you are BEM, and I know that's a controversial term, and we're actually discussing about whether or not to continue using it, then you seem less likely to get shortlisted, and we want to understand the reasons for that. We also identified, although in terms of a degree awarding gap, we don't have a big gap at all if you look in terms of ethnicity, if you look at who gets a good degree, which is basically a 2-1 or a first. So the ethnic minority students that we do recruit, they are really good students and they do well here. But if you then look a bit closer and look at who's getting first class degrees, then some gaps do open up. And although the REC doesn't actually ask you to analyze first class degree awards, we have gone that extra term. And so one of the things we want to look at is, what are the origins of that? I think suspicions would be around, the experience of being, extremely minoritized within your department, and not necessarily being able to sort of plug into the support networks, or not feeling that, there are that your situation is properly understood by the staff that you're interacting with, can be an impediment to learning, or just the general day-to-day experience of racism is bound to hurt people. But that's one of the things that we want to investigate. And one of the things we actually will be doing a little bit, I guess, of experimentation of our own as well. I think, as you alluded to, Crystal, so, well, you mentioned blinding, but maybe it's a kind of blind initiatives, but in terms of when people apply for jobs for recruitment, then there is some evidence that if you blind the people making the assessments, so blind the identity or the ethnicity of the applicant, then you tend to get fairer assessments. There's good data on this, certainly looking at hiring rates of men and women, but also then of people from different ethnicities. And so Rob Veracci, who's head of recruitment, is taking this on. So they are going to run some pilot studies. He has, I think, some experience in this before. It's not a silver bullet, and it can be quite difficult to implement, because often there are clues within the CV anyway that kind of give away the sex or the ethnicity of the applicant, and so it can be tricky to implement. But we've identified an issue in the data with recruitment, and these are some of the measures that we will be taking, and some of the research that we will be doing.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to take one more question. I'm going to just read it, which is, how important do you feel that the reverse mentoring of senior leadership is? And is there any feel for any increase in the uptake and the outcomes, or frictions or resistance from some of these initiatives in terms of helping to educate, I believe, is the point that's being made here.
So the reverse mentoring scheme was introduced for the senior leadership team, I guess it's nearly 2 years ago now. And this was one of the outcomes of an action from the EDI strategy, which was to provide our senior leadership team, which is predominantly white and predominantly male, with training. And then actually it was Nick Jennings, our former Vice Provost for Research, who was very keen on this idea of introducing reverse mentoring. He had been Chief Scientific Advisor at the Ministry of Defence, and he had experienced it then and found it extremely valuable. And so the senior leadership team, I think 10 or 12, which is more than half the members of the team, signed up to be mentored in the pilot. And the pilot was judged a great success. I think it was very enriching. And it is about, giving the people who have the power in this institution, but who do not then have the day-to-day experiences or insights of what it feels like to be a minority, or to have a diverse background, and it gives them more of an insight into what the experiences of staff are. So the scheme is now being expanded to the next layer down in the management team. I'm going to be mentored starting in 2 weeks' time, I think, and so it is something that we are now continuing and expanding.
Fantastic. I'm just there's so many more questions I'd like to ask, but I'm just wary of what the time is, and that we may well, what I'm going to propose is that probably in about a year's time, I'll bring you back in, and we're going to hold you accountable as to what actions have been delivered in the interim from one point to another. So you've got another belonging invite. I'm not sure what date it will be in 2022, but I will send it through to you to say, come on, tell us what's happening now. Say again.
It's an incentive, Wayne.
Yeah. Buckle down. Yeah. Because I think
Anique and I think the rest of the people who are involved have been involved in putting together the action plan and have taken responsibility. So if people look at the plan, they will see how broadly throughout the institution the ownership of the different actions has been assumed. And so, we are, I guess, Imperial is a place where, people get things done. I mean, I think in some universities, there's a lot of talk. There's certainly a lot of talk goes on around here, but being held to account is absolutely the right thing. And as pleased and as massively relieved as we are to have got the bronze award, I am a bit nervous about even the term award. And I think it's nice, it's recognition that the application we put together was a serious piece of work, was an honest piece of work, but it means absolutely nothing unless we deliver on the commitments.
Yeah. Just had a message through from Harbourjan, which I agree with him as well, is that we need to get together a meeting of all of the owners of the actions so that we can sit down, discuss, and have a clear strategy as to how we're going to work together. I think what it was, what Anique had said, was that it was good that people from different aspects of the college were working together to produce this document. It has to be something which is owned by the Imperial College community. It can't be something which is top down. It must be something that we all buy into. So I think moving that forward, I think Harbourjan's suggestion is a brilliant idea for what we can do to actually get it kicked off. Now we've got the award, that's just an award, right? Now the real work actually begins. Crystal, I just want to say a big thank you for that question as well that you had asked earlier on, and because it was to the point and very spot on. I don't know. Normally I would be giving my closing statement here and just wishing you well, but this is something so important. I know that all of us have a vested interest in this actually succeeding, because we want to have better representation across the board. So what I'm going to say is keep working together. That's what we have to do. Keep working together, because we want it to be that in 5 years' time, in 5 years' time, we don't want an issue of racism or racial inequalities to be really being evident at Imperial College. We have to be realistic about that. We may need to look at the senior management and diversifying that. And so I'm going to put that challenge out there, because I think we do need to think about that very seriously. And we take it from there. So I'm not going to say I'm launching a campaign. I'm not running for president, right? I'm not starting my presidential election. But what I am saying is that we do need to see some more diversity at the top. So let's work towards that, and all the way through the whole system. Okay. So Stephen and Anique, it's been absolutely fantastic having you both answering questions this afternoon. And I want to just say a real big thank you for giving up your time to just illuminate the Race Equalities Charter for the Imperial College community.
Well, it was a pleasure. And well, I would like to invite anyone who's here, if you have got concerns or you've got ideas, then, please do get in touch with myself or Anique.
Yeah.
And we're always happy to engage in conversation or discussion with people about why is the college doing this or that. I think often there is a bit of a gulf of understanding sometimes, and we don't always do enough communications. And I'm very keen on the idea of individual conversations with people to help advance this agenda.
Brilliant.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for everyone for giving up their time and joining it today. It means an awful lot to us on a personal level, those involved, but we do really want to make a meaningful difference, not just to the Imperial community now, but leave a lasting legacy.
Brilliant. I'm just going to advertise what's coming up next week. More great stuff. So next week we're going to have Maxine Myers, who is the AHSC Communications Manager at Imperial College, and she's going to be here with us and giving us some insight into her sense of identity and belonging. And if you haven't seen any of the others, or if you want to catch up on any of the others, you can go to our YouTube channel which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, where you can see other interviews which we've done as part of the Belonging series. Once again, I want to just wish you all a happy weekend, and thank you all for coming. If there's anyone who wants to stay behind for a quick chat, then please do. The recording is about to stop. Thank you all.
Take care. Thanks for having us. Have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.